What would you do if telling the truth meant losing everything? Your job, your reputation, maybe even your peace. My name is Nina Carter. 3 years ago, I was just a delivery girl. Now, they're calling me the voice of change. But behind every spotlight is a shadow, and this is the part they never show you. This is how I took my story back. They say you can tell a lot about a person by the way they look at you when they think you're not worth noticing. I've seen that look my whole life. At 25, I was delivering poke bowls and overpriced green juices to a building that had more glass than a cathedral and more ego than Wall Street. That day was just like any other. Rain in Chicago. My hoodie was soaked, the paper bag in my hand starting to buckle at the corners, and the front desk guy, as usual, avoided eye contact like it might give him a rash. I'd been doing deliveries for almost 3 years. Not because I lacked ambition, but because ambition doesn't pay medical bills. My mom had been sick since the spring after I got expelled. She was my only parent, and I was her only child. I took care of her the best way I knew how, rent paid on time, a stocked fridge, and enough heating in the winter so she didn't cough blood. But I wasn't always the delivery girl. There was a time I had a student ID that could open doors at one of the top public universities in the Midwest. I was studying linguistics and translation. I was good at it. No, scratch that, I was exceptional. Then I translated something I wasn't supposed to. It was an internal email chain. Sloppy Mandarin from a tenured professor making jokes about the accents of international students. I brought it to light, thinking truth had a place in academia. It didn't. They said I broke protocol. Violated privacy. Tarnished the school's reputation. I lost my scholarship. I lost my future. And just like that, I was back home in Detroit, holding my mother's trembling hands and wondering how many ways a system could tell someone like me to sit down and shut up. But I didn't. I found other ways to speak. Back to that rainy day, I was making a delivery to Whitmore and Blake, a boutique finance firm on the 47th floor. The kind of place where suits cost more than I made in a month, and people wore watches not to tell time, but to prove something. I was supposed to leave the bag with the receptionist. But she was on the phone and waved me toward a conference room. She didn't even look up. So I pushed open the door. And walked into a room full of Armani tension. 10 people around a marble table. One massive screen. Charts, contracts, a Zoom window with a man speaking Mandarin. And me. Dripping rainwater on their imported rug. Wrong room, one of them muttered. A guy with slicked back hair and a face like a magazine ad. But I froze. Because I understood what the man on the screen was saying. I mean, really understood. He wasn't just reviewing terms, he was twisting them. In Mandarin, he used a phrase that translated roughly to lock the tiger in a cage. In context, it meant the contract would legally trap the American company into a renewal at double rate after year 1. Except, the English translation on the screen said, option to renew at mutual agreement. My heart thudded. My brain screamed, walk away. Don't get involved. But my mouth. Sorry, I said, slowly. But the translation on that screen is wrong. Dead silence. All eyes on me now. Like I'd just grown a second head. The guy at the head of the table stood. Tall. Crisp navy suit. Jaw like a carved cliff. His presence was quiet, but surgical. And dangerous. Excuse me, he asked. I looked at him, at the others. My sneakers squelched against the rug. The phrase he just used, I said, pointing at the screen. It doesn't mean mutual agreement. It means you're legally boxed in for the renewal. No negotiation. The room was frozen. One of the men typed something quickly. The translation on the screen shifted. Confirmed what I'd said. The man in the navy suit narrowed his eyes. Who are you? I felt my ears burn. Delivery. And what exactly makes you qualified to interpret Mandarin commercial law? He asked, voice laced with that calm, condescending charm I hated. I wanted to disappear. But I lifted my chin. I was a linguistics student, specialized in Mandarin English translation. I also interned on contract analysis for an immigration law firm before I got expelled. That word, expelled, hung there like a broken streetlight. I left the bag on the table and turned to go. My hands were shaking. Wait, the navy suit said. I paused at the door. What's your name? Nina, I replied without turning. Nina Carter. Then I left. I took the stairs. 47 floors down. Not because the elevator was broken, but because I needed to move. To breathe. To run from the fact that I had just blown up something way above my pay grade. That night, I microwaved soup for Mom and helped her down the hall to the bathroom. She was frail. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold the spoon. I heard you humming today, she said. I do that when I'm nervous, I replied. What happened? I told her. Not everything. Just that I walked into a room I shouldn't have, and said something that might have cost someone a fortune. She smiled faintly. Sometimes, baby, doing the right thing costs. I went to bed that night thinking it would all blow over. It didn't. The next day, I got a call. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Then I got a text. Ms. Carter, this is Ethan Blake. I'd like to speak with you. In person. I stared at the name. Ethan Blake. That was the man in the navy suit. The man whose company I may have just saved, or embarrassed. I should have said no. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I met him 2 days later in the same building. This time, they actually buzzed me in. The same receptionist looked at me like I'd grown teeth. The elevator ride to the top felt like ascending into someone else's life. His office was all steel and minimalism. Like a magazine photo shoot. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. You made quite an impression, he said without turning. I didn't mean to. But you did. He turned, finally. Studied me. You exposed a loophole in a 7-figure deal. You could have walked away. I almost did. Why didn't you? I shrugged. Because I knew what I heard. And I was tired of pretending not to know things. He was quiet a moment. Then, I want to offer you something. Not a job. Not yet. But an opportunity. A trial. Come in twice a week. Sit in on negotiations. Help us catch things we're not seeing. Language, culture, assumptions. I blinked. Why? Because I'm smart enough to know what I don't know. And you, clearly see things others miss. I wanted to laugh. This man, this suit, this symbol of everything I didn't belong to, was handing me an invitation. A sliver of a second chance. But second chances are never clean. I looked at him and said, I'll come. But if you're looking for a mascot or a PR story about lifting up the underdog, you've got the wrong girl. He smiled slightly. Good. I'm not interested in fairy tales. Neither was I. But part of me wondered, as I left that day, if maybe, just maybe, my story wasn't over yet. They didn't give me a desk. Just a chair in the copy room. No nameplate. No email. No instructions. It was like being invited to a dinner party and then made to eat in the hallway. Ethan called it a trial phase. But I knew better. Trials came with guidelines. This came with a message, stay small. Stay silent. I showed up anyway. 3 days a week. I sat in meetings without introductions, scribbled notes no one asked for, and watched people avoid eye contact like I carried a contagious truth. At the end of one meeting, a senior executive walked past me, then doubled back. You're still here? I blinked. Excuse me? I thought this was just temporary, he said with a smirk, then disappeared into an elevator lined with brass and cold indifference. That night, I walked home in the rain. Didn't take the train. Didn't call an Uber. I needed the sting of the cold on my face. I needed to remember I was alive. Mom waited up. "You're humming again," she said softly. "I guess I do that when I'm holding things in." She smiled faintly. Then let go of something. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I overheard two execs in the elevator chatting about the new multilingual onboarding program. Spanish, Mandarin, English. I asked, politely, if I could review the drafts. The HR director gave me a look. One of those "how did you get this number" looks. But she forwarded the files. What I found made my skin crawl. In the Spanish version, a line meant to reassure employees that they could request disability accommodations had somehow been translated into a threat. Consequences may follow if medical limitations are declared late. And that wasn't all. The word for employee support had been mangled into compliance surveillance. It wasn't just tone deaf. It was dangerous. I printed everything. Highlighted the worst lines. Walked into Monday's leadership meeting and laid the packets on the table. "I found discrepancies in the Spanish onboarding materials," I said calmly. Silence. Mr. Rolex leaned back in his leather chair. "I'm sorry, are you part of HR now?" "No," I said. "But I speak enough Spanish to know a threat when I read one." He rolled his eyes. "We used a certified translator. Google doesn't count." "I didn't use Google," I replied. "I used 5 years of field experience, 2 community interpreters, and the basic human decency to ask if this language made people feel safe." That shut him up. Ethan sat at the end of the table, silent. When I finished reading, the HR director looked like she'd swallowed a stapler. "We sent that out to over 300 new hires last week. Then 300 people might think asking for help will cost them their job," I said. Ethan's voice finally cut through. "Fix it. Immediately. And from now on, Nina sees all multilingual content before it goes out." My hands were still shaking as I left the room. But for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was from anger. A day later, they gave me an office. Small, windowless, with a used desk and a keyboard from the Clinton administration. But it was mine. I even got an official title, Cross-Cultural Communications Analyst. People started noticing. Not in a good way. They whispered. Loud enough for me to hear. "She must be related to someone. Probably a PR stunt. I bet she's sleeping with him." That one hit harder than the rest. Because nothing cuts deeper than being reduced to someone else's shadow. But I kept going. Worked twice as hard. Spoke half as often. Became the go-to for fixing the problems no one admitted were problems. Policy phrasing. Contract clauses. Cultural sensitivity in marketing. Then the article dropped. Without my permission. The unexpected executive, from delivery girl to corporate disruptor. Front page of the company intranet. Accompanied by a glamorized headshot I didn't take and quotes I never gave. I stormed into Ethan's office. "You approved this?" He didn't flinch. "It's good press." "For who?" I asked. "You get to be the visionary who found me. I get to be the charity case with a decent vocabulary." "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" I snapped. "Because it sure feels like I'm your latest DEI success story. Except I never asked to be anyone's story." He opened his mouth. Closed it. Said nothing. I walked out. Didn't answer emails for 2 days. Didn't go to the office. Didn't even tell Mom. I just sat on a bench outside an Aldi, staring at nothing, while my phone buzzed with headlines. That's when I got the envelope. No name. No return address. Inside was a letter. Shaky handwriting. Lines of imperfect English. I saw the article. I screenshot it before it was deleted. My name is Lamia. I'm 16. I never saw someone like me in a job like that. I didn't know we could. Thank you for existing out loud. I read it again. And again. And I cried. Not quiet tears this time. Big, breathless sobs that startled a nearby pigeon off the trash can. I went home. Showered. Pulled out the blazer I wore to my mother's first hospital hearing. And I went back. The receptionist flinched when she saw me. I smiled. Relax. I'm not here to throw chairs. She laughed nervously. Ethan's expecting you. When I walked into his office, he looked wrecked. Not in a broken way. In a human way. I was wrong, he said. I sat down. If I'm going to stay, I said, then I set the terms. No more features. No more PR. No more headlines without consent. He nodded. And we hire real translators. Not outsourced bots. Not interns. People from the communities we're serving. We pay them well. We give them credit. He hesitated. Then nodded again. You're not asking. No, I said. I'm not. He leaned back. Why did you come back? I reached into my bag and handed him Lamia's letter. He read it slowly. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak. I came back, I said, because this job was never about me. It's about who gets left behind when we get lazy with language. As I stood to leave, he looked up. What do you want your title to be? I smiled. Not a title. A function. He blinked. What function? Interpreter, I said. Of systems. Of power. Of silence. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time. And I left. Not with a badge. Not with fanfare. But with clarity. I was never supposed to speak that loud. But now that I had, I didn't plan to stop. I should have known better than to think silence meant safety. 2 weeks passed since I walked back into Whitmore and Blake on my own terms. No more PR spins. No more unauthorized photos. I'd finally carved out a role that felt mine. I led a task force on inclusive language. People stopped confusing me for an intern. Even Mr. Rolex nodded at me once in the hallway, though he still called me the translator girl. Then it happened. Monday morning. Clark and Lake Station. I looked up like I always did, scanning the skyline as the train screeched to a stop. That's when I saw it. There I was. On a billboard 3 stories tall. Not me exactly. Some glossy, edited version of me. Chin raised, arms folded, that same unauthorized headshot. The tagline underneath? Breaking barriers, one voice at a time, Whitmore and Blake's Nina Carter. I stopped breathing. The crowd moved around me. A woman bumped my shoulder, muttered excuse you, but I barely heard her. I stared at that face, my face, but the words underneath didn't belong to me. That version of me didn't fight to be heard in boardrooms. She didn't cry in supply closets or sleep on buses. She was a symbol. A tool. A product. And someone had decided to use me. Again. I rushed to the office, stormed past reception, up the elevator, and into Ethan's office without knocking. He was on the phone. I didn't care. I slammed my phone on his desk, screen up. Billboard photo. He froze. It went up, he said, blinking. You knew? I asked, my voice shaking. He hesitated. They sent me mock-ups. I told them it was premature. You didn't stop it. I thought it had been pulled, he said. You have to believe me. No, I cut in. I don't. His jaw clenched. Nina, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like betrayal. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, my phone buzzed. A text. From a friend in HR. This just leaked. Thought you should see it. I clicked the attachment. An internal email. From Ethan. If the Carter campaign lands, we have leverage for Q3 brand storytelling. She's the only narrative we control that feels authentic. I stared at it. The blood drained from my face. You were never trying to protect me, I whispered. You were trying to own me. He stood, his voice rising. That's taken out of context. No, I snapped. That is the context. You said I was part of the story, but I was the story. Your PR strategy. Your chess piece. Nina. You said you wanted my voice, I said. You wanted my image. That's not the same. I walked out before he could reply. People stared as I passed through the hallway. Some had probably already seen the leak. Some didn't need to, they saw the fire in my face and made room. That afternoon, I cleared out my desk. Packed up my notebooks. My tea mug. The sticky note Mom had written me that said, "Speak, even when your voice shakes." I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. Just walked. Until Marta, the janitor, found me in the lobby. You okay? She asked, her kind eyes heavy. No, I admitted. But I'm done pretending I am. She nodded, pressed something into my hand. A thermos. For later. For when you remember what you're worth. I hugged her. Harder than I meant to. The next day, I didn't go in. I didn't check my email. I went to the South Side Community Center where Lamia took weekend classes. I didn't know if she'd be there. She was. She looked up from a folding table, surprised. You came. I needed to, I said. We talked. About her poems. Her school. How she felt when she saw me on the billboard. I thought it was cool, she said quietly. But also. Not really you. She got it. Before I left, she handed me her notebook. A new poem inside. She spoke like thunder. And they tried to bottle the storm. But storms don't stay silent. They find their sky. I cried. Again. That night, I sat down to write my resignation letter. But halfway through, I stopped. Because quitting felt like surrendering my name. My voice. My story. The billboard wasn't the betrayal. The betrayal was that I let them believe they could tell my story better than I could. So I wrote something else. An internal memo. I CC'd the entire executive board. Subject line, the language of ownership. In the body, I wrote. You didn't just use my image. You used my life. You turned lived experience into a sales pitch. I will not resign. I will not disappear. But I will speak. And I will no longer ask for permission. Then I booked a conference room. Sent a calendar invite to the board. Only half showed up. The others claimed scheduling conflicts. No matter. I stood alone at the front, projector on. Slide 1, the billboard. Slide 2, Ethan's leaked email. Slide 3, quotes from staff who felt similarly exploited. One anonymous Ladings employee said, every time they need to look inclusive, they pull one of us into a photo shoot. Then forget our names. Then I said. This isn't just about me. This is about every person you've flattened into a slogan. My story is not your brand. It's not your quarterly narrative. If you want real change, start with accountability. Start with consent. They didn't clap. But they listened. The next day, the billboard came down. In its place, they ran something new. Black background. White letters. 3 languages. Your voice matters. We'll help you be heard. It linked to a hotline for immigrant workers facing exploitation. A week later, Ethan emailed me. No subject line. Just this. I was wrong. You were brave. If you ever want the seat at the table, for real, it's yours. And this time, no campaigns. No cameras. Just work. I didn't reply right away. But I printed Lamia's poem and pinned it to my wall. She was right. Storms don't ask for approval. They just rise. The offer sat in my inbox for 4 days. If you ever want the seat at the table, for real, it's yours. Ethan's words echoed every time I opened my laptop. And every time I closed the lid again. I didn't know if I was ready. Or if ready was even the right word. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about cost. What would it cost me to sit at that table? What parts of myself would I need to dull or sand down to make room? I'd spent years building a voice that finally felt like mine. Was it worth risking that for a seat that still came with strings? Then Mom had another bad night. It started with the coughing, sharp, dry, like her lungs were folding in on themselves. When I got to her room, she was sitting upright, hand to her chest, gasping between syllables like her words had splinters. I grabbed the keys, didn't even change out of my sweats. The ER again. Same hallways, same sterile smell, same nurse who remembered my name but not my face. Mom gripped my hand the whole time, whispering, "It's okay, baby. You don't have to stay." But I did. The doctor said she needed the better inhaler, the one that worked. Without upgraded insurance, he shrugged, "We can't keep her on the name brand." I nodded, lips tight. I didn't cry until I got home. And then, I opened my laptop. I accepted the offer. Not because I forgave Ethan. Not because I suddenly trusted the system. But because sometimes, strategy is survival. And survival means playing the long game. They gave me the title, Director of Inclusive Language and Equity Messaging. They gave me an office with glass walls, a view of the skyline, and furniture that didn't wobble. People started knocking before entering. But no office can erase the memory of folding chairs and invisible days. I built policies. Hired interns from underrepresented neighborhoods. Ran 3 multilingual equity workshops that actually got applause. On paper, I was thriving. In my chest, though, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it did. One afternoon, after a training that had the room genuinely buzzing, Ethan asked to see me. "You've been killing it lately," he said, gesturing for me to sit. I stayed standing. "We're hosting a summit next month," he continued. "Global partners, corporate sponsors, media. I want you to speak. Your voice carries weight now, Nina." I tilted my head. "Media? Just industry blogs. Maybe one national outlet. We'll shape the narrative. You'll have final say on your speech. No cameras. No edits. And you don't get to rewrite my words." He nodded. "Deal." That night, I sat beside Mom's bed with a legal pad in my lap. She was quiet, curled into her favorite blanket, her breath soft but uneven. "Are you nervous?" she asked. I nodded. "A little." She reached out, touched my wrist with those familiar fingers, paper thin and warm. "Don't let that room eat your voice," she said. I swallowed hard. "I won't." The day of the summit, the office smelled like anxiety and fresh-baked pastries. People were dressed 2 shades nicer than usual. The whole building felt manicured. I wore my navy blazer, the one I'd worn when I defended my thesis. The one that made me feel like someone who deserved to speak. The stage was lit like a TED Talk. Ethan worked the crowd like a mayor at a ribbon cutting. I was sipping bitter conference room coffee when I saw her. My old professor. The one who'd testified at my academic misconduct hearing. The one who said I had too much edge for academia. She was laughing near the buffet with 2 board members. I blinked, heart thudding. Ethan appeared beside me like a ghost. "I invited someone from your past," he said casually. Thought it might be poetic. Poetic? I echoed. Full circle, you know? I didn't answer. I walked on stage while rage bloomed in my ribcage. The lights hit me like a truck. My hand shook as I adjusted the mic. I could see her in the back, sipping from a stemless wine glass like this was an awards show. I began anyway. 3 years ago, I was delivering lunch to this building. My name wasn't on any door. I wore a sweatshirt that still smelled like bleach from my overnight shift. I didn't even know what this company did. Polite laughter. But I did no language. And I knew when something sounded wrong. I told them about the translation error. About fixing it. About being ignored. But I kept showing up. And eventually, someone listened. I paused. Looked directly at Ethan. I used to think that was the start of a new chapter. But I've learned, sometimes, it's just a new room in the same broken house. The laughter died. The language of equity isn't about slogans. It's about survival. For people like me, for families like mine, words can mean medication or none. Rent or eviction. Dignity or silence. I didn't perform. I testified. And when I walked off that stage, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Because I knew what was coming next. It took less than 18 hours. The article went live the next morning. How Nina Carter proved language can save corporations millions. I stared at it. The only quote they used was one I never said. They'd turned my story, again, into a budget line. I should have cried. But I didn't. I brewed tea. Opened my laptop. And wrote the sharpest, clearest post of my life. My voice is not your headline. My experience is not a pitch deck. I do not exist to make you look progressive. I exist to tell the truth. In my words. On my terms. I hit publish. By nightfall, it had 35,000 likes. By morning, over 100,000. My inbox flooded with messages, immigrants, student journalists, community leaders, people who'd never seen someone like them behind a podium. One woman said, I never realized how many times I translated my pain into professionalism until I read your post. That night, I read some of the messages aloud to Mom. Her eyes sparkled even though she was tired. You found your people, she said. I smiled. No, I whispered. They found me. The moment I saw my mother collapse, I stopped being Nina Carter, director of anything. It was 2 weeks after my post went viral. We were at the kitchen table, arguing over whether she should walk to the mailbox. I said no. She said I was babying her. Mid-sentence, her face slackened, and her hand reached for mine, but missed. She slipped out of the chair like water off a countertop. I don't remember screaming. I just remember the weight of her body and the terrifying stillness in her eyes. At the hospital, the neurologist called it a minor stroke. A warning shot. Like her brain flickering the lights to remind us the wiring wasn't what it used to be. She stayed 3 nights. I barely left her side. I watched the monitors beep and her chest rise. I memorized her breathing. It gave me too much time to think. About everything I'd said, and everything I hadn't. About how I'd spoken up for thousands of people, but maybe missed the one person who needed me most. About what it really costs to be visible. When she came home, her wit was still sharp, but her walk was slower. She hated that. I helped her shower. I learned how to measure her blood pressure without waking her. Work kept calling. I let it ring. Ethan texted. Let us know what you need. We've got your back. I almost laughed. They had my back now. But where were they when I was folding uniforms after night shift or negotiating discounts for medication? The real pressure wasn't from work. It was from expectation. The world had decided who I was now, a symbol, a success story, a mouthpiece. It was heavy. One night, while Mom slept, I reread my viral post. The likes. The comments. Still climbing. And then a DM came in. I work in HR. I reported something I ignored for years. I don't know what'll happen. But thanks to you, I couldn't unsee it anymore. That's when I realized. This was never about the table. It was about the people who'd never even been handed a chair. I returned to work 2 days later. Not because I owed them. But because the work was unfinished. People greeted me with that nervous half-smile you give someone after a public crisis. Like they didn't know if they should congratulate or pity me. I went straight to check on the mentorship interns. Kim, the quiet Vietnamese-American girl I'd taken under my wing, handed me a folded note. You remind me of my aunt. She raised her voice too. They told her she was too loud to lead. I hope I never forget how you stood. I put the note in my wallet. It's still there. Later that day, I rode the elevator to the executive floor. Ethan was waiting, holding 2 coffees. He offered one. I declined. We sat across from each other in the small conference room that had once felt like a courtroom. I wanted to say thank you, he began. I raised an eyebrow. You made us better, he said. No, I replied. I made me better. You just happened to notice. He nodded, slowly. Then he took a breath. I'm stepping down. What? I submitted my resignation. Effective next quarter. I blinked. Why? Because I waited too long to listen, he said. People like me. We don't get to lead the next chapter. Not without stepping aside first. For once, he didn't sound like a CEO. He just sounded tired. And real. I didn't say much. Because sometimes the apology comes too late to fix what's broken. But just in time to prevent something worse. 2 weeks later, they offered me his position. Not just his office. His power. Senior VP of Culture and Ethics. I sat with the offer for hours. I thought about Marta, who still brought me tea without saying a word. About Lamia and her poems. About Kim. About my mother, asleep on the couch, the oxygen machine humming beside her like a lullaby. I accepted. But on my own terms. I rewrote the contract. No use of my name or likeness without signed, written consent. Mandated multilingual equity officers in every regional office. A rotating community advisory board with veto power. And not just a seat at the table, but a seat on every hiring panel, policy review, and executive strategy meeting. They signed. So did I. It wasn't glamorous. People still doubted me. Still called me a DEI pawn behind my back. I got interrupted in meetings. Emails still sometimes accidentally left me off the CC. But I stayed. Because I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to make it impossible to be ignored. My first act? I tore down the diversity posters in the lobby. In their place, I hung a single line. Representation without power is decoration. Then I hosted an open forum. No scripts. No filters. No branding. Just stories. A man stood and cried while talking about being misgendered at work. A woman resigned mid-meeting, citing 5 years of gaslighting. A black single mother admitted she'd never told anyone she had a second job at night. It wasn't pretty. But it was truth. And that was the point. We didn't need polished statements. We needed mirrors. That night, I came home to Mom, reheated her soup, and sat beside her while she watched Golden Girls reruns. She looked at me, amused. You still hum when you're nervous? A little. You doing something brave again? I nodded. But this time, I said, it feels like mine. She reached over, squeezed my hand, and said, then sing louder. So now, I ask you. What would you do if your truth made people uncomfortable? Would you speak up if it meant losing your job, your comfort, your reputation? Would you stand anyway, knowing someone would twist your words, shrink your story, try to make your storm sound like background noise? Because I did. And I'd do it again. But only because of people like you. The ones who whispered encouragement when I stood alone. Who sent messages I never asked for but desperately needed. Who reminded me that courage doesn't need permission. So here's my question. What's the story you've been too afraid to tell? Because someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe that someone is you.